Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and yesterday my VR goggles have finally arrived. So in this video I want to give you my very first impressions of flying a couple of flights in virtual reality now. Tell you some of the impressive pros that I've noticed on my first couple of flights, as well as some of the contrasts. So, I've ordered the HP Reverb G2 and they've been shipped and arrived within a day's time. Now, please note that this video has not been sponsored and I have not been endorsed or in any other kind supported by HP, so this is a totally independent first impression. And it actually has to be, because I will say a little bit of stuff that I would probably not be able to say if this was a sponsored video. So, my very first impression then. I loaded up the Spitfire at Duxford and jumped into the flight deck, and I was totally blown away. I was totally blown away by how realistic it looked. I had one chance to sit in a Spitfire in real life. Unfortunately, just sit in one, not fly in one. Really unfortunately. And it was impressive. It was absolutely impressive. And in virtual reality, it just looked the same way. My previous impression of the Spitfire in Microsoft Flight Simulator was that it looked a little bit like, you know, a little bit two-dimensional-ish, and it was lacking a bit of the 3D detail. And virtual reality totally changed that. It looked 100% like I was sitting in the real thing. When looking around the cabin, things just were as they were supposed to be, I'd say. So that was a really incredible experience. But the first downside actually came rather fast, and that's the clarity of everything and the frame rate. Because virtual reality is a lot more frame rate intensive than my normal simulator. You can see right now I'm flying a turn here and everything is running 100% smooth. That's how I want it to be. But when I went virtual reality, all of a sudden things were lagging, and lagging and VR is probably one of the worst possible combinations. Because it really gets you. It really gets you. I have to fiddle a little bit with my settings. So far the only way I could get it really smooth was to go on really low settings, which then sort of spoiled the experience again. And so I departed for a flight, and it was an incredible feeling. Like, I felt I was really sitting inside that airplane, looking outside, seeing the different dimensions, and most importantly, getting an impression of altitude. That was probably the by far most impressive feeling about flying in virtual reality for the first time. So having that feeling of altitude, that feeling of motion and of movement. And you'll surely remember my video where I commented on if flight simmers were able to just hop in a real airplane and fly it. In that video I said no, because you don't get any of these feelings that you have in the real airplane. Now, my first impression on VR is that I might have to reconsider that statement. Not totally. I'm still convinced that you cannot learn how to hand fly a plane, but going virtual reality really brings you a lot closer than I could ever have imagined. However, that said, we talked about the performance, and here's the next big thing. That's probably the biggest. The performance I could live with if I could find a compromise on my system. But here's what I find very hard to live with: the resolution of the game and the readability of instruments. Now, I found it very hard when I loaded up the 737 or when I loaded up some other airliners to actually read anything on the gauges. In the 737 I could not read my speed or my altitude tapes. They were just unreadable because they were too blurred. Because the resolution in virtual reality wasn't good enough. So I went to the simulator settings and I kicked it all the way up to see what I could get. Now, when I set the total level of detail from the default 80 to 100, things were still unreadable, but with a notable frame rate impact. And then I thought, just for fun, I'll set it to 195. Well, I've got maybe one frame every 3 seconds and then had to kill my simulator and restart it because it was totally impossible even to get back to a menu. So that made things a little bit difficult. And I found that the 737 probably is not usable for me in virtual reality unless I can find a workaround to get these display clarity issues sorted out. So I went out, tested another couple of airplanes. The Phoenix A320 surprised me positively in that compared to the 737 there was something readable on the instruments. Now if I wanted to read the text on the engine and warning display, I still need to put my head incredibly close to it to be able to read anything. But if I just wanted to read the primary flight display, my primary field of vision, that actually worked. Now, it was not as good as I would have hoped, so it still caused me some head itches after flying a traffic pattern. But that's something that I'll start working on over the course of the next couple of days, trying to figure out what might be causing those issues and trying to find a workaround for them. And on that very first traffic pattern in the Phoenix A320, I was stunned. I was totally blown away how realistic that felt. It honestly felt like I was sitting in a full flight simulator straight away. The way the flight deck looks, perfect. The way the scenery looks, well, as said, full flight simulator-ish like, just looking a lot better than the full flight simulator actually looks. And overall, it was an incredible experience. But in order to actually read something on the MCDU, in order to actually be able to see something properly on those displays, I still need to find some compromise between quality, or rather visual quality, and frame rates, because right now I really have a feeling that it's very, very hard to actually try to read the gauges. Like, let's have a look at the flight I'm doing right now. Right now I've taken the Coronado Cessna 337 and I'm just flying a little bit around the blocks in Heidebusum in northern Germany. And you can see that the way everything looks right now is really sharp and there's no problem reading anything. Overall it's looking really, really good. So when I enabled virtual reality on this, the numbers on the speed and on the speed indicator and the altimeter were just barely readable. The numbers on the HSI were readable with a little bit of fantasy. It really felt like I've taken my glasses off. Well, it felt a lot worse than taking my glasses off. But depending on your level of vision, that's probably the closest comparison I can come up with. So I'll spend the next couple of days trying to sort out how it's actually possible to get that resolution up, because I honestly have to tell you, if I can get that resolution up to a level where I can actually read my dials, then I will be blown away. I will just be blown away. So, closing this up, my very first impression on the virtual reality. I would never ever have expected that it had that much of an immersion factor. And it gives you that additional feeling of being there, it gives you that feeling of space, of speed. And that is totally incredible. But by now, the frame rates and the visual resolution are probably among the big things here that still have to be improved on. And that is an improvement that's definitely necessary. I'm going to try around some other aircraft types to see if I can find any type in my hangar that actually works well with virtual reality. Because my impression is you just have to be close enough to the panel in order to be able to see something. But so far in virtual reality I've not found out a way to zoom, even though there is that focus button, but that caused me some trouble so far. So I'll have to experiment with it a little bit. Anyway, closing this up, my first impression of virtual reality. It looks and feels absolutely stunning. But would I recommend it without hesitation? No. And maybe I will. Well, absolutely I will. Provided that I can sort out the issues with the visual quality and the readability of instruments and screens. So that's my first impression in virtual reality. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again later today.